So let's do first a proper introduction of ourselves. I'm Karel van Eijkeren. I have a master's in electrical engineering at the University of Twente in Enschede. I specialized on the lab on a chip technology. And within Demcon, I started in 2019 as a project manager, and now as a business unit manager, biotechnology and IVD systems. I have experience with lab on a chip-based products. I worked at a startup company myself as well at the start of my career. Later on, I gained experience with account management and within Demcon about ISO 3485 product development. And within Demcon, I'm responsible for expanding our international network and getting in touch with possible customers, of course, but also together with Roel, make sure that we as Demcon are able to run the projects with our organization. Roel.
So my name is Roel Penterman. I have a background in physics. Did a PhD in chemical engineering. I'm system architect at Demcon since 2017. I started my career at Philips Research, where I started actually in material science, where I got my PhD in. And when Philips moved more to healthcare, I started to explore fluidics, IVD, and I developed a sample prep, automated sample prep for sepsis. Spun out with that idea to Cartridge-Based, which was then a startup in Belgium. But when I arrived there, I became soon the system architect of their flagship platform, the IVDR platform, and brought that with a big team of Philips and Cartridge employees to the market in 2014. So it's a fully simple in result out PCR-based IVD platform. Started to work with Demcon actually at that time, got enthusiastic and joined Demcon 8 years ago. And since then, I'm still involved in IVD, supporting the business, exploring new opportunities, but also supporting the projects with my background in this field. So,
thank you. Short, a little bit about Demcon. It gives you also a little bit of context to where our presentation is coming from. Demcon is an international operating contract engineering company. We do also contract manufacturing. Started by two at that time students, Peter and Dennis, still both in the company. And in 2026, they grew the company to more than 1,200 employees. And depending on, of course, on what we do, ISO 13485 certified product development and manufacturing. Many locations in the Netherlands and also some international locations where you can find us. We do quite a lot within Demcon. It all started as engineering. So we do that, of course, in life science and health, where we basically are an extension of our customers' R&D department. But we do it also in high tech, data-driven solutions. At this moment, of course, very attractive. We can also do simulations, and we have a dedicated optics group. We can also take care of manufacturing. So that's contract manufacturing, where we assemble the products we develop or products auto-developed within our manufacturing facility. We have some own products within our Demcon group, some own product companies, and that helps us to get experience with certification, market access, and also understand what the customer needs. And sometimes we invest in companies that are using our services as well. Dedicated group for subsidies, and we have some companies that use our locations as basically as an incubator. So for the IVD product development, we offer, of course, then the product development. So that's I will show you later, but our engineering services, and we of course deeply regulatory knowledge, IVDR for the European Union, but also FDA for US products that go to the US markets. Within the engineering part, we do everything from a very early start. So feasibility testing, concept generation, understanding the customer needs, helping our customers with business needs, where it has influence on the product development. and we can go up towards series production. User-centered design. Typically, we incorporate, of course, the latest technology that is available. Sometimes we do also a redesign or an update of an existing product, typically when components are end of life, for instance, for larger companies. So we can help with that as well. And we can transfer design to production. That could be our production, but could also be any other contract manufacturer or to the manufacturing side of our customers themselves. And where we typically help is because we do the development on a daily basis. We know the pitfalls, we know how to move fast, and therefore help our customers to go to market as early as possible. From a couple of sites, we have some photos, gives you a little bit of an impression. Over here you see the location where I am working in Enschede. So that's our innovation center where we do the product development. We have some facilities for prototyping, assembly, and testing. We have also a wet lab, and of course a lot of whiteboards for the ideation phases. And for our production center, that's the picture on the left, also in Enschede, across the street where we work. Very helpful. We have a numerous of production lines for series production of products. Some lines that are easy to change to other production lines when the series are small. Warehousing, procurement, etc. Is there located. So we can do product development for our customers because we have quite a large group of very knowledgeable engineers in all disciplines necessary, all centered around the system engineering group, who take a look from a systems perspective. Where is it used? How is it used? What subsystems does it consist of? And from there, other disciplines will join the project. Electrical engineering, of course, software, mechanical engineering, but also some competences related to production. We can incorporate into the project, but also very dedicated ones as, for instance, optical engineers or thermal engineers when necessary. We've also a broad network of partners around us and suppliers, so we can use them as well when we need the information. And because we're quite big, we can always acquire information from within Demcon, from people that perhaps are not part of the project, but might have certain information that's necessary or valuable for the project. Now we're coming to the content of this webinar, and that's basically product development towards production. And within Demcon, we divided that into three main phases. One is the discovery and development phase. The other one is industrialization, and the other one is manufacturing. And they don't start and stop all of a sudden. There's always a kind of a handover. And within the discovery, I will move through them independently. Within discovery, it's more about ideation, design. Industrialization is more targeted towards, okay, how do we move from a design towards manufacturing? And manufacturing itself is also, of course, a dedicated part. We want to make sure that all your suppliers are working, quality is good, production lines are functioning as needed. We all divided those again into smaller chunks that I will cover one-on-one. Perhaps for me, I'm not sure if that's if we are able to do that, Michael, but I would like to have an idea about who's now thinking about production or who is now very early. That might be interesting, perhaps to come back to at a later stage.
And maybe folks can raise their virtual hands, for instance.
Oh, yeah.
That might be a good idea.
That's also good. Yeah. So who's thinking about production at this moment? Yeah. a few, very few, and who's in an earlier stage, so still figuring out how the product should look like? Yeah. Now there are also people that are already on the market. Only one, two, yeah. Good. Well, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat. And Michael, please interrupt me. I'm now going to stage by stage. If there are any questions about a certain stage, then I can answer them at that moment. So I would like to start at the discovery stage, the first stage. Perhaps also good to know before I start diving into this one is that within Demcon we can start and stop everywhere in this stage gate model. So it's not necessary that we need to start with the discovery stage. We can jump into this wherever our customers need us, and also can stop wherever our customers want us to stop and take over themselves, for instance. Discovery. So that's the three main topics that are important in the discovery phase are the business viability, customer desirability, and technical feasibility. With the first one, the business viability, it's all around the business case. What is the market? What might the product cost? How much margin do our customers want to make on it? What do the customers of our customers want to pay for it? These kinds of questions that are really important for the choice of components, for instance, and how much engineering effort we should put into the product development. If something should be really cheap, for instance, typically cost more product development effort than something that might be quite expensive, because then we can move faster and not think too much about certain parts and the cost of certain parts. Customer desirability is all about features. What features do customers want? How physical properties, size, colors, ease of use. Typically by medical related products, it's also about does it fit within the workflow the users are used to. Important things that should be get back into the product design. And then technical feasibility. And that's about, are the ideas technical feasible and also feasible against, for instance, the price targets. Well, what we do...
I think for us and for any project, the system requirements are key, so that you know what requirements for a product are, and these three basically give input to that. And if one of those three is not fully known, that can have an impact later if you are not, let's say, fully aware about your cost price, for example, and that has to change later in a project. That can be can of course have impact on your product development timelines and budget.
Typically what we see is that this early stage is quite fussy and goes a little bit back and forth between various topics. But the main thing is that really the critical system requirements are getting known, and that there is a good idea about the technical feasibility. And what we typically end up here is, for instance, proof of principle testing. These are very early test setups to test a dedicated function. That could be, for instance, is there, when you have an assay, fluorescent-based assay, you want to know if the detection can pick up enough fluorescent signal. You can test that if a certain sensor is able to get enough signal back from your assay. So function per function tests of high-risk functions. And you end up also with an overview of all functions needed in the design. You see that on the left bottom side. And this gives a very good first idea about the status of your project, get insight in requirements you really need, and gives a good basis to go to the next stage.
Maybe one question before we do from chat. So the question is, in the discovery phase, how is the IP covered if a new partner steps in with a help question, but they don't have their ID patented yet? And especially probably if you're going to collaborate on improving that idea or tweaking it in this phase, how do you typically go about that?
Yeah. So of course, very important one, especially for customers who own the IP and the value of their companies in this IP. We as Demcon, everything we contribute, we hand over to our customers. So all new ideas, all new designs, we hand over, and it's for our customers to make sure that they protect that IP. At the same time, it's also their responsibility that they look for freedom to operate, to see if the ideas are indeed not patented, for instance, by somebody else. That's how way of working is. So we are very flexible, and we typically don't put in any IP we own or we are aware of that is owned by somebody else. So it gives us, our customers, a lot of freedom to work with us.
Yeah, and maybe to add, we always work on an NDA. Yeah? So also if IP is not yet patented, well, it's kept, let's say, in between companies, so to say.
Yep. Any other questions about this stage? If not, then I will move forward. At the end of the session, there's also time for questions, I believe. So if you think about something, well, some examples, Roel, that's perhaps nice to have some tangible information here.
Yeah, so this is an example of such a feasibility test that we had to do for a customer, because they had actually, so the picture in the middle shows actually their flow cell that they had in mind for their spatial genomics application, or they had it on the bench. So they had the whole, let's say, feasibility, the workflow tested on the bench. But this flow cell actually has quite some usability issues. So what this flow cell is basically on the bottom, you see there's a microscope slide where an FFPE tissue was fixated. And then this flow cell was used to apply different fluorophore for hybridization and coloring basically the tissue, and then imaging it with the microscope. Idea of the concept, of course, to create a fully integrated system. You will see an example of this system or a picture of the system later. But the idea was actually in this feasibility, it was difficult to assemble the whole with a lot of risk for leakages and creating air bubbles. And we moved to this right bottom side concept, where basically the user lays in the stack of the, let's say, the microscope slide, a rubber layer and a top slide, and then just with a simple clamp, you could close then the flow cell and have it, let's say, ready for the process. And well, the pop setup you see in the right top corner. So there, let's say, in the beginning, we strive, of course, to come up with a simple setup, let's say, easy to in a reasonable time frame to develop. And here you see all those springs. Here we could, let's say, optimize the pressure, the forces that has to be applied in order to get the flow cell leak tight. And there we also could test, let's say, how the behavior was with respect to air bubbles. And such if you show then the feasibility with such a pop setup, that gives them sufficiently de-risking to create it later, let's say, a final design in the alpha. If you would do that immediately, you would maybe spend a lot of money on this alpha prototype, and then if you then find out that it's not functional, then you have to go back to the drawing table. So we strive with simple pop setups to de-risk the project as good as we can in the start of a project. And this example is for another company that was developing a disposable based system, a cartridge-based system. And here you see some examples of pop setups in the left top corner. You see a combination where the idea was to have a constant 37 degrees temperature across the whole all let's say environmental conditions. In this case, it was not sure if it would also meet these conditions when the cartridge was at let's say at 30 degrees outside temperature. So we started actually with making some concept design and including FEM analysis to find let's say an optimal concept. And then in the picture on the right side of that, you see a real pop test where we also verified whether this concept was working. In the left bottom, a concept of getting blood from a blood tube, which is of course a challenge because it's under vacuum. So if you pull some liquid out, you create some vacuum. So again, an example of a quite simple setup. And on the right, you see an example of blister piercing to introduce some liquid into the cartridge. Now, these kind of pop setups, let's say we do test, let's say, separate functions and try to achieve, let's say, sufficient, let's say, confidence that with the concept chosen, we can move to the next stage.
Yeah, so I'm missing a circle here, but the three main topics are indeed perhaps I'm not sure what's happening. Here we go. Are the viability, feasibility, and desirability. All are important. Typically, when you think about product development, new technical advances, technology push, perhaps it's all about the technology and is it going to work? But we should not forget the human factors, so the desirability, and the business factors, the viability. And these two are equal important on the product development cycle as well. And when we combine those, of course, there's a nice sweet spot that we should be able to identify for the optimal product features.
And maybe it's good to say that we have an industrial design team that can also help with these other circles. So of course we are, well, as a company and engineers, we are focusing a lot on technology, but we have people in house that can help with the desirability to make a user test, for example, an early user test to get let's say some first user input. And also on the viability, of course, we don't have the let's say oversight of all markets, but we can of course help with estimating the costs of a device, for example. So and that can help you to build a viable business case that will ultimately get into a successful product.
Okay, going to the next stage. That's the product, what we call the product definition stage. And it's all about requirements. It's about regulatory. It's about design concepts. And it's also about risk management. And then we're talking here about patient risk. So what happens when a diagnostic test fails or gives the wrong answer. And these are important parts of the product definition. And what typically is nice to have at this stage is a very early integrated prototype. I have some topics to show you what I mean with that. So the requirements, what we typically ask our customers, what are your requirements? What should the product do? How should it look like? What is important? What's not important? And one of the things might be, for instance, that our customers say, well, it should be a device that it should be stand on a desk. And we say that's our customer requirements, and we deduct system requirements for that. So, for instance, when it should fit on a desk, the size shall be smaller than 40 by 40 centimeters, for instance, and should not be too heavy. So these are then what we call system requirements that you can measure and check after your design is finished and you build your product to see, hey, do we comply to our system requirements? And when we meet the system requirements, we do comply to our customer requirements. So it's all tangled together. Of course, there's also a regulatory, especially with IVDs, is very important. It's a regulated market in that sense. So it's good to know at the very early stage where are the products being marketed, what continents. So of course you have the EU with the IVDR, but the USA uses FDA, Australia uses something different again. So these are important things to know upfront. And then there are various standards that we should take into account, and these standards typically are related to some parts of the risk parts of a design. For instance, when you use a high power laser, you want to make sure that this laser light cannot escape the enclosure and shine into somebody's eyes. So there are standards related to laser safety that we should identify, and then of course take into the requirements as well.
One question about regulatory. Do you notice now with the recent changes and the pending changes in regulatory that this is becoming more of a hurdle for startups to tackle, or is there sort of still a phase where people are trying to figure out how to best interpret that, and is that potentially impacting some of the projects you're running, or not so much?
Yeah.
I think
both.
we are quite clear on that. So the IVDR is quite clear, but there is of course this transition phase where companies still can, well, if they already have an IVDD on the market, they can still pursue that until 2029, but following some requirements, of course. But for, let's say if you are a startup now, you have to just to comply to the IVDR. And we see basically that a lot of the changes is in the more in the performance evaluation. So it's more on the proof and statistical proof that you have a safe product, basically. As a system developer or instrument developer, since we already work, let's say stringent according to guidelines, it doesn't have a huge impact. Of course you have to understand the IVDR, and you have, for example, we can because the IVDR has different classes A to D. But you're allowed to, for example, to make the instrument an IVDR A instrument, and that helps you because then it is still self-certified, and the notified body is not, let's say, coming and on your premises. So you could, let's say, make intelligent choices to simplify it for yourself later. And that could be big. There will always, let's say, if you have an infectious disease test, it will always be class C or D. So there will be a component in your system that will be audited by the notified body. But if you make your, let's say, choices intelligently, then you could, let's say, have only a part checked, so to say, and that can help you later. So in that sense, it has impact. And we have a quality department actually. So of course. Engineers do have, we have, let's say, quality engineers in house that have detailed knowledge about this. So if I don't know, I just go, let's say, across the corridor and I ask, and then get this input. So that is quite nice.
Makes sense. Thanks.
Yeah. So the short answer, for our customers, it has impact, especially at the performance evaluation at the end, showing that the product fulfills the requirements. And for us, we already are working quite nicely, and we have some ways around to make the impact as less as possible. So that's about regulatory, and then there's the risk management, and that is all about that. If something does not work as intended, the patient should not be at risk. And for diagnostics, that's misdiagnosis. We together with our customers identify those risks, and come up with mitigations. And those mitigations are then again part of your system requirements. So that could, for instance, be a sensor that might fail. That could cause some serious patient harm by misdiagnosis. So the system should have a way to detect a failing sensor. So it's all part of this very early phase before you start your detailed design. Are there any questions?
Yeah, there is a question in the chat.
Yeah.
And what so it's about the IVDR. Is it covered in the whole EU, or are there still are there still countries that have their own rules? Yeah, that is a typical question. I would go to my quality engineer, but well, I believe that, let's say, well, the IVDR is let's say for the entire EU in that sense. But I know that some parts may not be covered by it, and then still national rules apply. But again, yeah, for that we would have to go to specific details.
For instance, the UK is of course not part of the EU anymore, and they have something that looks at the IVDR, but have also some own additions to it. So that's one of those exceptions, you might say. Then I have this slide about design concepts. What we typically see, and we will tell you a little bit more probably, is that come up with design concepts is something important and something a little bit neglected. Sometimes you should think out the box to come with design solutions for certain functions. You have might have a function based on various designs. Roel, perhaps you can elaborate a little bit more about this.
Yeah, I think, let's say, if you have an idea that you want to bring to market, you immediately have let's say already a concept in mind, of course. But what we tend to do is Karel just explained about requirements, about regulatory and so on. So let's say in this previous, in the discovery phase, we are already starting to think, let's say, what are the requirements, and we changed it. Karel already explained which functions could potentially then fulfill these requirements. And what we use is a so-called morphological overview. So we list on the vertical axis, we list all the functions that the system has, and then we start thinking about all kinds of options. And when you're a startup and you have an idea, you're for each of these functions, you might already have a solution. But for some functions you might not have because you didn't think about packaging the device, for example. So, and this morphological overview creates all kinds of ideas. And usually in this phase, we start to integrate those, let's say, the ideas per function into a fully integrated concept. And the nice thing is actually that you can, from each row, you can select a different concept. And sometimes you come to different solutions, different concept solutions for the same requirements, basically. And this exercise also helps you to. It might be that your concept was already the best one, but at least it's being triggered actually in this exercise. And and of course, if you come up with a concept and maybe on paper you have let's say compared both concepts, it might still be worth to really test such a concept before you really start spending your money in the upcoming phases. So that is what we do in product definition, basically. And this product definition is also finalized with basically a kind of, it's still on paper, but maybe supported by some tests that you did. Where you basically have your requirements that are frozen and the concept that you have in mind to further develop, and then basically on paper you have to show, that's what this is our basis basically, to show that this concept is really with a quite highly likelihood will fulfill the system requirements before you go to the next step, because usually the alpha and the beta phase are the huge, let's say the more you need more engineers, more budget to fully develop the system. So this is what in the US they call this the money gate. If you pass this gate, then you can start spending money. And this is an example of such an integrated system that we developed for a customer. So that's in the right top. So there it was not only, let's say, we had some integration risks, but also we worked with different parties that were contributing to the project, and we wanted to show actually that with the consortium of partners led by the customer could produce a fully functional device. That is still being made with 3D printed materials where possible, of course. You want to keep your spend as low as possible. And usually, well, the main goal of such an integrate is product de-risking. So you want to, let's say, prove the concept. But usually we see that these integrated concepts really also help for the customer themselves to test, for example, the assay. So that is what you see below. And we could also make a nicely looking concept for all kinds of business activities. So, yeah.
Any questions about this stage from the audience at this time? Not yet. So I know that one of the questions beforehand was a question about what do we typically see go wrong or parties forget, and one is indeed bringing together all partners that are contributing to a system. We could be the hardware partners, for instance. There could be a dedicated software partner involved. There could be some biochemicals, or if there's a disposable involved, perhaps there's also manufacturing of plastics involved. And yeah, who is now responsible for what and the alignment? And this is one of the things that you should really think about beforehand, who is responsible for what. And most of our customers want to be in control of that themselves, but it should also be they should also ask themselves the questions: are we indeed experienced enough to bring all these parties together and align everything? And do we have enough people and capacity to handle this? It's also something we could help in, or that you say, okay, there might be somebody else who's taking control of bringing together all partners, and that's an important step you should consider very early to prevent any misalignment. Then the alpha stage. Everybody has its own definition of what an alpha prototype is, but our definition is that the alpha prototype is a prototype that should look like the product you want to bring to market, should have all the features and functions, and should have the performance of this product. However, it's the first time you put it together, so perhaps there might be some issues that are not working as intended, and you want to do this as quickly as possible with a minimum of investment. So you might choose for different production processes, for instance, 3D printed housing, for instance, or parties that are able to supply quickly with metal parts, or PCBs for the electronics that are more quickly and agile during such an early phase. So the production process is different, and there's also not a dedicated production process yet, because there's also no design yet. So that's the alpha, and with the alpha, of course, the alpha is based on all the system requirements. I should incorporate those, and at the end you have a test plan that clearly states how you want to test all the requirements listed, so you can check if you fulfill to the requirements. That's one. And the other side is that you already start thinking about production a little bit, of course. So, for instance, you identify critical suppliers by a dedicated sensor or component that's very special to your product design. And you start thinking about the production process. So you end up with the design, you start putting it together by some very skilled persons. And at the same time, you think, okay, what are the production steps? Is there any dedicated tooling needed for assembly, for instance? So you already start thinking about that. And also perhaps perform an FMEA about the production process. So is there, for instance, a connector that you could place the wrong way around or swap out with another connector? These are already the things that you start thinking about the production. So that's the green part, the industrialization. In the alpha, before we dive into this one, we typically see that our customers want to get to the market as fast as possible to earn some money to get traction. And sometimes they want to use the alpha prototype as a research use only product. That is possible. However, there are a couple of things you need to take into mind. One is, of course, the certification. Then here, of course, it is not an IVDR. So you cannot use it for diagnostic purposes, for research use only, but it still means that you need to have CE certification, for instance, in Europe. And that's then the machine directive. Should still be a safe product to use by somebody. It's the first time you put it together, so some things might not work as intended, and there might be a small design change needed to repair some parts if you want to bring it to market very early. And what you need to take into account is that there's no production process. There's no suppliers listed. There's no production process listed down. There are no instructions for operators to put it together. So manufacturing such a product, also based on prototyping production processes for certain parts, might be expensive and time consuming. Don't expect a product that can make you a lot of money, but you could use it as a research use only product. You need to think carefully about it.
Also limited amount. So it's, if you want to make hundreds or thousands, so it's rather, let's say, in the tens of instruments, for example.
What you see here is a product we developed for very known biosystems, and this is indeed an alpha product, so it looks very finalized. It is not, so that's also the catch. And it's the first time you put it together, so getting it up and running, smooth all the small bugs and design issues out is sometimes time consuming. But it looks like a nice final product, and in this case, instead of being put on the market, our customer used it as an internal development tool to optimize their own assay development. Any questions at this time about the alpha? Then I will continue to beta. Beta is a design optimization, mostly talked about industrialization, so optimizing production process, critical supplier selection, using the final production process and parts, and that is important because you want to have a production process that is stable and does not change, because that's also not typically allowed under the IVDR. Because it can have impact on the product performance if you change something in your production process. So here are all kinds of small iterations and design optimizations from customers, from our operators, from some requirements that might not be met fully, will be repaired. And at the same time, we set up the production process, design tooling, make contracts with suppliers if that's in our scope. And with it, you end up with the beta that, in this case, looked the same as the alpha. On the insides, things changed a little bit, though. And this prototype, it's still a prototype, can be used by our customers for performance evaluation. So in a clinical setting, testing how good it works, and if indeed it diagnoses, if it's an IVDR, correctly. And that can be done, although it's not a product, because you manufactured your product with the final components in a way that is very similar to series production. So that's the beta. And then we go, and I go a little bit quicker now, also in light of time, to production process. And that is the what we do is then the operational validation. That is showing that there's a pilot production batch coming off this line. So there's a line, and we test if the line is indeed, if all the stations in the line are working correctly. Supply chain is released, so ERP system is filled, suppliers are validated and supplying us with components. And the later stage, we call that the 0 series. It can also be sold by our customers. That is for performance improvement. So that is taking a look at the complete production line. Is everything working together smoothly? Are there some optimizations that can be done to increase yield or throughput, for instance? And some, if needed, some supply chain changes. That's the latest stage, at which thereafter should be a very smooth series production of the product. I have one slide left, and that's how to start, when to start, especially at the forefront, when to seek help. Well, what we often see is that companies come towards us with all kinds of questions, and that we can help them with a kind of a workshop. We could, for instance, take a look at the value proposition. What are important parts of the product? What are their customers looking for? How is the workflow at their customers, or how is the workflow of the product itself? Some early concept sketches. How might the product look like? Etc. And we can also come up with a first idea about a production of a development plan. What steps to include, where to look for, what's the de-risking strategy, what's the impact of regulations, etc. And typically we can get quite far with a couple of workshops together with some of our experts and the customer, but it's really, of course, tailored. And that concludes my presentation.
Maybe a quick question on the workshop. I imagine you work with big companies, large numbers and quantities. Of course, those are very, very interesting to work with from a Demcon perspective. I assume that the same is true for startups as well that are looking to answer questions, or what is the threshold for a workshop like that? Does it usually start with a question or an email, and would they then just reach out to you to kind of figure that out, or what's the best process there?
Yeah, the process is that we somehow come in contact, and it could be by an email or however, of whatever, and then we get in normal conversation with our customers, and from that we listen to them and also think about, okay, what are the unknowns for us? Why can we not give an answer or a dedicated plan with budget and timelines yet? Because there's some unknowns there. Or a customer asks us, well, typically startups, I'm unsure about certain parts or regulations. Could you help there? And we can. What you typically see by larger customers is that they are well aware about all the steps to be taken and come to us with dedicated questions to get information about some certain parts where we really can have a focus on one question. With startups that are less knowledgeable, it's more a broader question where we can help them focus on the next steps.
Makes sense. Okay, I have a ton of questions, so we're going to try and get to a couple. I think I'm going to start with the last one, because then we're going to move up the chain you discussed. So the first one is, going from POP to alpha, how far is it acceptable to stray from the design and manufacturing process in interest of economical small-scale prototype builds? So to kind of save or press cost in that stage to build economically efficient ones, how far do you stray off the end manufacturing path?
Yeah, not too far. So you have a set cost of goods based on your requirements. A product might not cost the world. So in your design, you want to make sure or have an idea that this, for instance, budget is feasible. Sometimes we say, well, if you go to injection molding, high volume of plastic parts, then costs go down rapidly. But for the first prototypes, yeah, we're going to a high cost prototyping process because of speed, because of investments that you need to do for injection molding, for instance, that are high cost investments to get a low cost product. So it's all, yeah, you need to keep in mind, are we certain that we can get to a lower cost when we use a different approach in a proof of principle or an alpha? And for proof of principle, you typically want to use off-the-shelf components to be quick and versatile.
Yeah, I assume, by the way, the question is more geared towards, can you go cheaper, or can you save some money in that small scale proof of principle phase to?
Yeah, we are.
Oh, you muted
Well,
yourself,
you're muted. Yeah.
Oh, so we are in the process of investigating this always. So of course you would like to have that. Well, for disposables, for example, well, we have this proof of concept. There is this integration and an integrated disposable, making it with a different manufacturing technology, actually poses a risk on the rest of the projects. So that is always let's say a kind of struggle. So how early do you need to actually start working on molds? And actually we are also now exploring alternatives, or at least finding alternatives to have this as soon as possible, indeed in small scale, but still very resembling the final properties of your plastics. So and I think it's quite fresh, but a colleague of mine has an idea of having iteration of 3 weeks, let's say, even with injection molding, to reduce the risk already in an early phase.
Interesting.
But this is a constant struggle, challenge for any project.
Yeah, that makes sense. And when, oh, sorry.
No, carry on, please. I did have a quick question, but I'll wait till you're finished.
Yeah, so that's fine, James. Let me first ask this one, and then you can hop in. So what are some of the most common issues that come up when going from alpha to beta stage?
Most of the common issues. Roel, do you have some?
Yeah, well, I have an example, but it is a bit related to the previous topic. So that's an older project where we decided to have an alpha, and it was still milled or 3D printed parts, and then we decided in the beta to go to mold, and that was basically a new alpha. We had to have an extra iteration. So if you especially for disposables, it's a risk actually to build with not final manufacturing processes.
That was going to be my exact question, which is at what point would you use soft tooling in the development process? So, because you could use like an SLA tool and then move to a hard tool that's more expensive. Which stage would you consider that, or would you consider it at all in this type of development?
Soft tooling would be then typically early in the project, and then the hard tool that you would go in the beta, I would say. But depending also maybe on the product, for maybe if it's a low risk feature, then you might have a different, and it also depends on the final market, the numbers that you intend to sell. Maybe you could even, for some products, you can stay with soft tooling. We typically see that in the biotech field where numbers are lower than diagnostics, for example.
Great. Question from Bart: do you always work in dedicated projects, or does it also happen that consortia or multiple partners have shared interest in a project or platform? For example, diagnostic companies work with isothermal amplification and may benefit from a first product with similar characteristics. So I think he's asking, is there sometimes like a group or consortium project that you tackle as well?
It's very difficult due to IP. If somebody asked us to develop a certain product, of course there might be another party that can benefit from that as well, or incorporate parts of that product in their own product. But it's something we cannot do because we don't own the IP. So it's really up to our customers to seek contact to each other come as a group towards us or negotiate licensing of IP. show us that that is indeed something they arranged.
Yeah, so in
correctly.
theory, if someone says, hey, I have an isothermal platform, I work with partner B, and I'm okay with them using that technology as part of the design process, then you integrate that and move forward accordingly.
Yeah,
Okay.
exactly. But that's not related to what we do, is that our customers develop a platform technology, so a more versatile product that others can use, could add their own assays on, for instance. That might also be something that we see that is happening.
Makes sense.
What we do as part of our competence development is that we contribute to European projects, for example, and that could also be a means to work together on a certain. So we were, for example, interested in looking into photonic technologies and getting to know the difficulties, challenges. And we decided to join a consortium where we could explore that. And we were then an integrator in that consortium, but there were also startups in that wanted to bring their product to the market. So, yeah.
Makes sense. All right, thanks, guys. This was very interesting. And I know there's a lot more questions actually than we were able to answer. But I think it's good for those of you on the line who do have specific questions or maybe want to discuss potential projects. And I know some folks already reached out to me beforehand. Please reach out to Karel and Roel directly. I think that's probably the best way to go through it. And yeah, thanks everyone for joining. Thanks, Karel. Thanks, Roel.
Yeah,
And,
well, thank you for the
next time.
attendance. Quite a big group here at this meeting. And thank you, Michael, for inviting us.